The following is a presentation of Project Independence and WCWP. Project Independence is the Aging in Place initiative of the town of North Hempstead.
Welcome to Project Independence and You.
Good morning and welcome to Community Talk Radio. This is Project Independence and You on LIU Public Radio. I'm your host, Rebecca Miller, along with co-host Otto Lohse and show producer Kristina Lew. Good morning to you both on this absolutely freezing morning where schools have had a 2-hour delay, most of them?
Yes,
Yes.
it's cold.
Everyone out there, walk safely. You know, it certainly need to walk very slowly and penguin-like on the ice is our golden nugget for this to start the show.
Good suggestion. I mean, obviously, when you're listening to the show, it'll be 2 days later. But I think
Still
it's going to
cold
be just
though,
as
and
cold
probably going to be a
and
little more
snowing.
snow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for our guest today, this morning, we're going to be talking to Dr. Christina Marini, an assistant professor of psychology at Adelphi University, the Gordon F. Derner School of Psychology. And we're going to be talking to Dr. Marini today about a lot of things, specifically about the REACH lab and a lot of the studies that are currently going on, and what information you're kind of looking to gather. Dr. Marini actually spoke at our Project Independence Advisory meeting a few months back, and we learned a lot about some of the research she's been doing. And another great thing about Dr. Marini is that she is from the town of North Hempstead. And of course, Project Independence in You is a town of North Hempstead program. So it's even a little bit more special to have a guest who kind of understands the area and, even our aging population. So welcome to the show, Dr. Marini. We're so happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So we'd love to hear a little bit about your background. I know we talked a little bit before we started the show, and you are from New Hyde Park. I know that kind of excited Otto a little bit.
Well, I'm from New Hyde Park.
Yeah.
Right between the goalposts from the high school.
Okay. Yeah.
Where are you at?
Yeah, I grew up in New Hyde Park. Like I said, close to the Queens border. My backyard was Lakeville Road as a kid. And I'm back here now actually. So I'm in Langdale right now. So
okay.
came back home after many years, which is really special.
Right.
Yeah, and in addition to growing up in New Hyde Park, I actually went to Adelphi University as well for my undergraduate degree. So that's where my whole academic career started. And it was really special after almost 10 years of studying and getting a Ph.D. and research training that I was actually able to come back home, right, to Adelphi as a faculty member in the same department that I got my degree in, which was really special. And to be able to come back, to Nassau County here and do this work, it's just really special.
Well, we're so happy to have you. It's always great to have someone who, is educated on Long Island too, especially, advanced degrees. So it's so great to have you in, and we're really interested. Can you tell us a little bit about the REACH lab?
Yeah, sure. So REACH stands for Relationships, Aging, Coping, and Health. That's the acronym. I co-direct the lab with my colleague, Dr. Catherine Fiore, and it consists of her and I, and then all of our wonderful graduate students and undergraduate students. That's one really great thing about Adelphi is we have a mix of undergraduate and graduate students all involved in research, and everyone has their own interests that all kind of fall under this umbrella. But broadly, we really focus on our social lives and our social relationships and how they help us or maybe hinder us as we cope with stress and change across that adult lifespan. So we consider aging more of a process, right? So some of our students are interested in kind of earlier adulthood, some middle and some later. So we really try to take a broad developmental lens to understanding aging.
My granddaughter got her master's in social work from Adelphi, and she now works in New Hyde Park Memorial High School.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, she had a good time there.
Yeah, I love it. It's such a great community. And yeah, the social work program is wonderful as well.
Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about what's involved in doing kind of a research project? Like how many people generally do you have, and kind of how many people are involved in it, and also the kind of time frame that you would kind of follow from start to finish.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great questions. And I think, the answer, like most of answers to questions we give as researchers, is it depends, right? So
Right.
you always kind of have to start with what is your end goal, right? Like, what are you trying to learn? And that's what we really encourage our students to think about, from the outset. If you're submitting a grant, if you're designing a study you're hoping to be funded with, grant funds, you always have to kind of start with that end goal first, right? What are you trying to learn? And then you kind of reverse engineer everything from there with a research project. Like, the variables that you're looking at, or maybe you're interested in, social relationships and mental health. You have to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to measure these things, right? Like what aspect of social relationships and what facet of mental health? And are we going to look at self-reported mental health? Are we going to try to get, healthcare provider reports, right? So who do we need to collect data from, right? Who do we need to have involved in the project? How many people you need, again, depends on what sample you're looking at, who you're talking
Right.
about, and also what you have access to sometimes too. I think we try to be realistic with our students too when they're designing projects. You might have the ultimate goal of what you would love and what would be ideal, but there's constraints also, right? So there's resource constraints in terms of money and time, that also impact research as well. And then, sometimes, especially when you're in the field of stress and coping, you have to kind of roll with it. And sometimes things happen
Yeah.
that might change your research agenda, right? Like I was all set to start a study with thinking about veterans, and then COVID happened, right? And it's a lab that focuses on stress and coping. That was, a really important opportunity. It felt really important to get out there and try to learn something, especially about older adults in the context of COVID, that we could try to help and benefit, learn something that would benefit the population. So
What do
that
you
kind of
do
development.
when something like that, because that kind of comes out of left field. Here you are, looking at just kind of, I guess, normal stress, and then all of a sudden COVID hits, and it not only adds more stress, but just changes how you probably can do the study in terms of in person or all that kind of stuff. So how do you were you like in midstream of this whole thing, or was it kind of early on when COVID hit? Because I'm sure it kind of had to make a lot of, you had to make a lot of, adapt to that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a, I feel like looking back, hopefully when I'm looking back on my career decades from now, I see this time as just so, you know, interesting because, research takes time to do, right? Any research study that we do with human subjects, human people in the study has to go through a rigorous, approval
Mhm.
process. It's called institutional review board, right? So colleges and universities have them, hospitals have them, right? So any research being done with humans is supposed to be reviewed by these types of board that make sure we're doing research ethically, right? We're upholding rights of our participants. And so, designing a study and putting these applications together, it's very time consuming. And so when COVID happened, researchers wanted to kind of step up and say, okay, like, this is a time to really learn about, how people cope with this type of stress and change and all of that. But, you can't just snap your fingers overnight and start a study, right? So I'm amazed at the people who were already collecting data, right? How quickly they were able to adapt and maybe add supplemental questions or an
Right.
additional wave of data, right? To kind of really jump in there and understand, be sensitive to what was currently going on. And those longitudinal studies are really fascinating. We're going to have so much to learn from them because they also have data from the same people before COVID happened. right? So that kind of pre-data, right, pre-COVID data is really important in terms of being able to ascertain what are the effects of kind of COVID on long-term health and well-being and social functioning in our older adults. Those kind of big longitudinal studies already had that pre-COVID data, right? So then they could kind of compare
Right,
pre,
right.
pre to post. So the people who were in that position, that wasn't our group necessarily, but there are several big studies that have done that. And so it's going to be really fascinating to continue to kind of learn and see what comes out of those projects.
It's interesting because so much of kind of what we do with Project Independence is focus on planning, because most times seniors, a lot of times, I shouldn't say most times, but a lot of times we hear from seniors when all of a sudden there's a crisis and they have no plan, they don't know what to do. So that's a stressor too. So kind of this whole COVID thing is a very good example of how that there's stress coming from the unknown, because a lot of time, we don't, if something happens and you're not planned for it, you fall down, maybe you break a hip, you go to a rehab, and now you realize your house isn't equipped for you to come home timely, and you're getting out of the rehab. So there's so many situations, especially as we age, that kind of happen, and all of a sudden you're in a crisis and you don't really know what to do. So that probably could have been, kind of like a good example of something you're just not expecting. And how do you adjust? Who do you reach out to? How do you find
Yeah.
your connections and your services?
Can you give us an example of one of the studies that you've gone through? One of the maybe bigger studies or one of your more favorite studies, you know,
Sure.
that the lab has done, that Reach Lab has done?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, the bigger data collection project that we wrapped up was in response to COVID. And so we felt like, we had to kind of put our normative plans on hold and really prioritize learning something about our older adults in the context of COVID. And at the time it was frustrating because it took time for us to find funding because we, compensate our participants. And by the time we got that approval, um, the vaccines had already come out, right? So here we are thinking, oh, we're at the tail end of this. We kind of missed the window. How, we want to make sure these resources are going to good use, and should we still do the study and so forth. And really after kind of just thinking about the time frame we were at. So we were in like, summer of 2021 going into fall of 2021 when we were collecting data or about to start. And, I thought to myself, just kind of pulling from my background studying military families coping with deployments, right? That even in kind of the aftermath of a stressor, this kind of reintegration period is really important and can be really stressful, right? So people who are coping with the military deployments, they come home, we kind of have this idea that everything is fine. There's the video of the puppies being happy and they're hugging and everything's good, right? But we actually know that this period of what we call reintegration, right, when a service member comes home, can be really challenging, right? Life at home is really different from life at war. And all family members have to kind of acclimate to this change, right? And it's a big transition. And so that got me thinking, well, if vaccines are readily available and we're kind of thinking, COVID numbers are down, um, let's actually use this as an opportunity to kind of study people's social reintegration back into life, right? It's going to be a new normal. It's going to be different. But let's actually look at that and apply some of these principles of what from my military background, to older adults in the context of COVID. So we decided to continue with the project and really frame it that way. So ask people a lot of questions about their social lives and kind of what precautions did you take during COVID versus, what are you doing now and things like that. And then as it turned out, variants started emerging and there was huge fluctuations, even in the context of our data collection period in terms of number of COVID cases. So like one time point in the fall, cases were pretty low when we collected data. And then the next time point that we went back 3 months later, it was the winter and cases were much higher. So even within our little 6-month period in a post-vaccine world where people were supposedly reintegrating back into society more so than they were, there was a lot of fluctuation in terms of COVID cases. So it ended up being a really rich, time period to collect data. And when you're studying things like stress and coping and transition, that timing of data collection is really important, right? So if
Now,
you're,
what happens
yeah.
with that data that you've collected? How does it get now used or help people in the future? Like what's next after that?
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean the first step is to make sense of it, right? And this is what I love. I teach statistics and research methods courses at Adelphi, and those are not the popular courses. Students aren't, dying to take them, but they have to. And really, that's the question we start the class with. Like, you're learning how to analyze data. What does that mean, and what do we do with it, and who cares? And really, you're a detective at that point, right? You have these data, and it's your job to make sense of them and to tell the story that's there, and to kind of unearth the nuggets that we can use to actually help people, right? And make sense of how are these variables related to one another? What are the patterns in the data? And so that's what we're working on. Those data are now collected, and we're trying to really tell a story with them of like what's important for older adults' mental health and well-being in this time frame, and kind of what are the social resources that are assets, right, in terms of promoting older adults' health and well-being, and who might be more at risk versus more protected, right? Like trying to think about individual differences, right? Not every older adult is exactly the same, right? So can we try to figure out for who this might be particularly challenging, and for who maybe not so much. And so what we do with the data, as scientists, we analyze them and try to make a story and figure out what they're telling us. We present them at scientific meetings, and so there's a whole conference, the Gerontological Society of America. It's a scientific conference that brings together people from all different disciplines, and it's almost a whole week of presenting these findings and trying to teach one another about what we've learned to help others.
Very, very, very interesting. Well, we actually have to take a quick break. We will continue talking to Dr. Christina Marini, who's an assistant professor of psychology at Adelphi University, the Gordon F. Derner School of Psychology. We will be right back.
WCWP is your home for great music and great conversation. You'll find all that and more on WCWP.org. Listen live on the web, check out the lineup, subscribe to podcasts, and stay up to date on the latest station events. Get in touch with us and let us know if you like what you're hearing. And find out how you can support or get involved at the only community public radio station serving Nassau's North Shore. Plus, sign up to get a free bumper sticker. It's all online at WCWP.org.
Welcome back to Project Independence and You. I'm your host, Rebecca Miller, along with co-host Otto Lohse and, of course, radio show producer Kristina Lew. We're talking with Dr. Christina Marini, and she is an assistant professor of psychology at Adelphi University, the Gordon F. Derner School of Psychology, and talking a lot about research. And it's so interesting. And, of course, Otto had the greatest question, like, what do you do with all these findings? And, I guess it's really how you kind of design any kind of program or medication or anything. You have to do research, you have to do studies, you have to, figure out what works and what people are really like. When Project Independence and Project Independence first started, we did a little research with Hofstra University just to kind of find out if does Project Independence really help you age in place.
I think I'm sorry, but you use two words there that are like magic words to me. All right, who cares? It's like I was involved in my business life with engineering companies that would design this wonderful product. And I would say to them, who cares? Does anybody need that? And I think when you're designing a study, like you pointed out in the beginning, what is the purpose of this study? Who cares? And you could study things for the rest of your life about something that nobody really cares about? Um, or how does it relate to the world so that it will better the world?
Yeah.
And coping, I think, to me, coping with change and transition as you age is a big thing because things change. Your friends change, they're not here, they change. This changes, that changes. COVID comes along, that's a point of change.
Yeah.
Um, and I think studying about the changes that you go through in your life and how you apply your ability to adjust to those changes is important, really.
Yeah, it's so funny to hear you, make that point that, as we get older, a lot of things change because I think that's one of the misunderstandings of later life and of aging. So I teach developmental psychology also, and we start the semester talking about our kind like, what are some overgeneralizations or kind of truisms of human development, right? Like what are sayings you hear? And they're like, okay, terrible twos, adolescents hate their parents, right? Like all that kind of stuff. And when we try to, I kind of push them to think about later life, and they're like, well, you turn 65 and that's it. You're just, coasting until the end, right? Like, or it's this perception that like getting older really stinks. It's just a lot
Right.
of horribleness, and they're not looking forward to it, and really not even looking forward to that part of the class, right? Because the class is taught developmentally, so there's a lot of excitement about, thinking about little kids and all of that, and then once we get to later life, it's like, well, this is going to be depressing, right? And so it's so important to me to kind of challenge those ideas in the class and get students to think about later life is actually chock full of transitions, right? There's a lot of change that happens. It's not a period of stagnation at all. And it can also be a really rewarding part of life, right? We call this the paradox of aging, whereas although older adults are coping with onset of chronic illness, you're dealing with maybe a lot of loss, right? As friends pass away and peers. But our older adults actually report better subjective well-being than younger adults,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
And so it's really important for them to leave the class, to me, challenging some of those ideas and those notions. And one student at the end of this last semester, we kind of talk about, what are you taking away from the class? And they said, like getting older isn't that bad. I'm kind of looking forward to it. I think it's actually going to be good in some ways. And to me, I was like, that's great. If one person feels that way, then I feel like, we accomplished something.
Well, just because you're 65, there's a big difference between 65 and 85.
Mhm.
It's like there's a big difference between 5 and 25. You
Yep.
know,
Right.
it's a 20-year spread, and there's a difference. There's no question about that. I can
Yeah.
speak from experience.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think some of it has to do with people's attitude towards you and where you are. And some people have a bad attitude about older people. They're never going to get old. As far as they're concerned, this is it, man. I'm like this. Look at those old people over there, not realizing someday they're going to be one of them.
It
And
happens like that.
yeah, right. So their attitude becomes, you know, maybe change as time marches on. And I
Mhm.
think the other thing is your surroundings as you get older. It's depending on like if you're in isolation and like the Project Independence uses adult orphan, where you're in a house by yourself with nothing around you versus me who has the good fortune of having children near me. Um, it's there's a big difference in your surroundings that impact your attitude towards aging. Uh,
Yeah.
it's
Right. I mean,
complicated.
it is. One of the things you were saying, Dr. Marini, about, terrible twos, and it's like seniors. What do you hear? It's always the most unsexiest things there is. Early bird special. All seniors want to do is, eat and then rush home, and go to sleep. It's the stigma on aging, and the fact of the matter is that today most of the population is older. So, like, for the first time in our history, you've got, like the baby boom generation. We talk about this. There's 10,000 people a day turning 65. Um, And that's a lot of people throughout this whole generation. And we spoke about this on last week's show. We had someone here talking about marketing to seniors, and they're still the population that has money to buy stuff. So, and most seniors and older people I know love to travel. They love to go out. They love entertainment, but it's for some reason, there's not enough of those, it's aging. The stigma is branded as, just give us the early bird special and we're happy. We'll go home and become invisible,
I think that's true for sure. And yeah, I mean, we talk about it in the scientific world as like the graying of America. And it's not just happening here, it's happening in
and see
all
how negative that is
countries.
too. The
Yeah.
graying of America. How about like the goldening of America?
But I will say, the Golden Bachelor, aired finally and came out, and my students really, because they were watching it, a lot of them, as we were taking the class, and they were like, wow, like these older adults are like, they're fun, and they're so much more mature. They're saying, I guess, maybe they were worried the show would be less entertaining because of less drama, but it was like refreshing. They're like, they're so emotionally like in touch with themselves and what they need, and like that's so nice to watch. In a way, I feel like it's giving them hope. Like, oh, and so I think that was one. I mean, it's only one example, right? But definitely a step in the right direction, for sure. And the other point, Otto, that you made about like who cares and why study this. I mean, that's why I've always kind of had that question in my mind. I had a really good grad student mentor who always would, any topic I proposed or paper literally would say, why does this matter? Why are you doing this? And just saying, well, no one else has looked at this before, so I'll do it is not a good enough reason. And so she always pushed me to think about how your findings might matter and how they could help. And so, that's really why I focus on things like stress, coping, and communication, because even sleep quality, right? Because these are all kind of mechanisms and things that we could learn, whether it's through psychoeducation or clinical intervention. In Adelphi, we're training clinicians, so that's really important, I think, to focus on mechanisms that could be an intervention point or a prevention point. And that's the other part of that I think is so important is community partnerships, right? So that's part of the reason I was so excited to talk to all of you and to make this connection is maybe, this could be an outlet for things that we learn in the Reach Lab. We can come talk to you and about the work you're doing. And hey, we're seeing that, social interaction around exercise is really important in promoting sleep quality. So maybe we should, talk more about that and what programming you're doing around exercise and think about what it means for sleep. And so that, making those connections, whether we're, with the research and then the community organizations that are actually on the ground helping older adults or helping veterans, that's so important. And that's definitely kind of in this next phase of my career that I'm going into, one of my top priorities.
Are you primarily like with the veterans area? Is it usually the older veterans, or do you also get involved with the younger veterans? The reason I asked the question is recently in Newsday they had a big article about burn pits and what bad repercussions people have as a result of that. And these are people who are young, who have a lot of years ahead of them. To contend with what they went through, as opposed to, frankly, somebody who was in World War II, who's already gone through 60 years or 70 years of getting adjusted to whatever they went through. I believe there's a need for the younger veterans who have been, the reality is that younger veterans are almost not identified. There's not that many of them compared to what used to be the percentage of population for World War II or any of those where people had to go, whether you like the idea or not. Younger veterans you don't really know who they are a lot of times. And I think they need to be supported and helped.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a great point. And I do both, right? So I do work with currently serving folks, that post 9/11 cohort. through my collaboration with the Military Family Research Institute at Purdue University, which is where I was trained as a graduate student, and I still work with them. And so, yeah, there's lots of, I think, research and resources to trying to really help not just, the military member themselves, but also their families, because this idea that in a in an all volunteer force world, we really have families who are serving together. So there's a lot of kind of understanding and push to understand military services effects on the entire family, not just the service member. And I agree, even our post 9/11 cohort are entering midlife on average, right? So they're aging, and thinking about their experiences, in a high operational tempo time in terms of number of deployments and things like that is really important. But I will say, though, that it is still really important to think about our veterans later in life. So our current cohort, our largest cohort of veterans who are in later life are our Vietnam era veterans. And that's really who I am most focused on right now. And you could say, well, they've had a lot of time to kind of figure stuff out and all of that. But what we're seeing is, you might have veterans who seemed fine all through kind of early and midlife, but now in later life, they are perhaps confronting their wartime experiences or their military service and kind of working through that for the first time. So I have some collaborators over at the Boston VA healthcare system who study stress, health, and aging of veterans, and they've come up with this idea of kind of later adulthood trauma re-engagement. And or later. And it's really informed a lot of my work, and actually the kind of reason we're doing this current study with veterans later in life. This idea that like things that happen as you get older might actually kind of trigger reminiscence or processing your wartime experiences for the first time. So whether that's just being retired and having more time to think about stuff,
Right.
or some of the loss that happens as you get older can trigger reminiscence, like loss of friends, the onset of chronic illness, and they're seeing that all of a sudden later in life, veterans really are kind of thinking about their wartime experiences more than they have in the past. Even like cognitive changes, like it becomes harder to repress unwanted memories as you get older. And so they really make the case that we really do need to actually be thinking about veterans later in life and their experiences, and this kind of processing, which can lead to good things or bad things, right? It could lead to late onset stress symptomatology, or it could lead to psychological acceptance and growth, right? It's a process that could end up, in good things too. And so kind of where I'm coming at and trying to figure out is like, well, what are the social resources that older veterans have that might make it such that engaging with their memories later in life actually results in something good and positive, and taking positive meaning away from those experiences. So yeah, I think it's important to take a developmental approach and lens to studying our military, population and veteran population. And I think there's merit in thinking about our current cohort as they get older, but definitely wouldn't want to overlook our older cohorts already, and particularly that Vietnam era cohort, because they have a very unique set of experiences that I think are important to recognize.
Have you ever been involved in a study, I'm just curious, that the outcome like really surprised you, or, several studies or one in particular that you really didn't expect? Because I guess you do a lot of projections, you kind of think a lot of stuff, and based on your experiences in education, we all make assumptions, I guess, but the outcome was so different. Just curious if you were like really surprised by something.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. That's a really good question. I mean, I know I feel like as researchers we try to repress anything that doesn't go the way we want, but I mean, yeah, we work hard to make sure that our predictions are based on theory, they're theoretically
Right,
grounded,
right.
based on research. I mean, I guess something that surprised me once, sometimes you're surprised when you do see what you expect to see, because it's so hard to actually get these findings and these models to work out. So I just published
Right.
a study with a peer collaborator, Dr. Stephanie Wilson, of Southern Methodist University. And we were trying to do something really hard. We were trying to link kind of daily dynamics between couples and kind of being reactive to marital conflict at a daily level, right? So having a fight with your partner, or tension with your partner at the daily level, and being emotionally reactive to that. How that would maybe predict depressive symptoms across 10 years, right? That's a really hard thing to do. And we thought it would be there, we wanted to see it, but actually seeing that even after you account for all these other variables, that was the case. We were surprised. So
Okay,
yeah,
well,
totally honest. Yeah.
that's very interesting. We do have to take a quick break. After break, we'll continue talking with Dr. Christina Marini, who's an assistant professor of psychology at Adelphi University and the Gordon F. Derner School of Psychology. We'll be right back.
So I get this call from my grandma, and she's like,
"What's a podcast and how much does it cost?"
So I tell her, podcasts are like radio shows, but you can download them on any device and listen to them anywhere at any time, and they're free. And then she says,
"I see, but where can you find good ones?"
And I'm like, go to wcwp.org/podcast and check out the lineup of original shows, or download any podcast app on your phone or tablet and search for LIU Studios. And she's all like,
"Oh, that sounds easy."
And then she asked me what an app is.
LIU Studios podcasts, available on any podcast app. You know, those little button things on your phone screen. Just ask your grandkids.
Welcome back to Project Independence and You, Community Talk Radio. Just wanted to put it out there. There's a lot of different ways to access Project Independence and You and Talk of the Town. Of course, on North Hempstead TV, channel 18 or 65 on Optimum, or channel 46 on Verizon Fios, and also North Shore TV. Shows usually air about 2 p.m. Please visit www.myNHTV.com for up-to-date schedules. You can also watch online at WCWP Studios YouTube channel or on the Project Independence website. So there's a lot of great ways to listen to Project Independence and You. Even though it's radio, we do record it, and it's archived, it's on social media, it's on North Hempstead Television. So there's a lot of different ways. And especially we have a great, very interesting guest like we have today. Dr. Christina Marini's been talking a lot about the research that goes on. And just before break, we talked a little bit about kind of surprising results. And I loved your response that sometimes the surprise is kind of, that's what you thought it would be. And, that's very interesting too. So
I'm sorry, but in the notes for this, the comment was made about impacts that impact people's lives that you get involved with. And I made a note here: wartime service, health, spouse, good or bad, and social network. And when you look at those 4 categories, that's a lot of stuff. And within each of those, I could see you could really go down into the ditches, if you will. And then I think, as I visualize it, so now you go down into the ditch about health, about a spousal relationship that might not be so great. And one of the things I think that can be learned from what you do is, okay, what do you do about it? What can I do about that kind of thing? And that could get pretty interesting, I would think.
Yeah. I mean, like the core of my work is to think about our closest social relationships and what they mean for our health and well-being. And yeah, recognizing, spouses or partners can be a source of support and a source of strength. Does that mean we tell people to go out and ditch that spouse and go find a new one? Not necessarily. But maybe it means for veterans, for example, that, other relationships can be important too. And we should prioritize, not just building that connection with your spouse or maybe even your closest friends and family members, but maybe the role of, connecting with other veterans is really important later in life as you're kind of confronting these experiences and trying to make sense of them. So maybe that really draws, it's important to maybe get veterans out there in, a VFW or American Legion and really talking to one another, that peer support, that there might be something unique or special about that kind of shared understanding or experience that you might not get from a spouse, or maybe if they serve too, everybody is different. But so I think that's where it's important when you're thinking about social relationships and networks to take a broader perspective. And that's something I'm challenging myself to do. Historically, I do really focus on that most intimate partnership or relationship. And now, with the study I'm doing and people I'm collaborating with, really, we need to zoom out and think about the whole social network, right? Maybe friends at the fitness class that they do through Project Independence are actually really important as well. And so kind of thinking about these interconnections between all these social relationships is important. And that's really where the science is going to, in terms of thinking about relationships and health, taking a broader view of someone's entire social network.
You use two more magic words there. Everybody different. You can tell 100 people that here's what they should do, and maybe 20 of them really will go at it. And I'm just using round numbers. I have no idea. But there's going to be 20% who are going to just go right on doing what they're doing, no matter what you say. I think all you can help are those who want a little help. People who don't want help, so be it. You can't do anything about it.
And you never know when something will resonate either, right? You might learn something or get something on a flyer from Project Independence or something, and maybe you're just not ready, right? There's kind of has to be a readiness and a willingness for change. And sometimes that just happens at a different point for some people. And you never know, if something is stored that then is helpful 5-10 years later. So I think it's important. Yeah, like you said, not everybody is ready at the time that they're confronted with a resource, but it doesn't mean that it can't be helpful later.
How do you find your participants? And if somebody's listening and thinking, wow, this sounds like something I'd like to be part of, is there a way for people to call and say, hey, I'd like to be part of a study? Or do you go to veterans halls and kind of send out information? How do you find people?
Yeah, so the study that I'm currently enrolling, recruiting for is the RISE study, Relational Influences on Sleep and Emotion. And that is specifically for veterans who are over 65 and either, have a spouse or partner that they live with. So if that's you and you're listening and you're interested in participating, you can call or email me directly. I don't know if there's a way for me to leave that contact info. I can. But then, one of the most rewarding things about this project so far has been the relationships I've built with community organizations and being able to actually go to events where veterans are at to recruit for the study. So the Long Island Air Force Association, for example, is an amazing organization working to benefit our veterans, and they've put on multiple events honoring our Vietnam veterans that I've gotten to go to. One of the best experiences of my life, just hearing some of these veterans be welcomed home for the first time, decades after their service, extremely emotional. They're doing amazing work. Another one is Honor Flight. They coordinate, and pay for veterans to actually fly down and see their war memorials in DC. And I've gotten to go to one of their events, a reunion flight for their folks. It's just amazing thing. So even if one person, ends up being interested in the study, that's great. But just getting to go and see these community efforts out there, aimed at honoring our veterans later in life and building that network of support for them has just been so amazing. Like, even if no one participates in the study, it's just been so cool to get to learn more about these organizations and the great work they're doing, and how open they've been to this research too, and how they see it as a valuable thing, has really kind of, made this, an exciting thing that we're doing.
It's hard for me. I always thought, growing up and whatnot, World War II, but thinking about it, Korea and Vietnam, those people now are 65 and older. I had the good fortune of being too old for Korea, no, too young for Korea and too old for Vietnam. And I was around in World War II, but too young, so I was lucky. I didn't have to I was in the service, but not in any of those things. And I often thought how miserable it must be, particularly Vietnam and Korea, when these were like street fights in the jungle. Um, it's and the trauma that has to take place when you're really in things like that, and it's not the movies. Uh, has to be really unbelievable, really. Um, it's good that they have an opportunity to talk, I think. It's particularly Vietnam, because that was such a political nightmare in this country when that went on.
No ticker tape parade.
No, no,
Yeah.
no. Yet there you are representing your country and seeing people around you getting killed on both sides, to be blunt about it. Uh, I'm not a fan of war, and there's no pros to it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that. I want to ask a question that's kind of off this topic a little bit. Very important topic, Otto, obviously. But this, not that it's not important, but have you ever done a study with pets, supportive pets? People travel with pets. People have pets to guide them. They're seeing eye dogs. There are all kinds of reasons to have a supportive pet, and interest. I'm sure it impacts positively on, sleeping and depression.
Yeah, and maybe you're inspired by this question because my dog is in.
Could be. So cute.
Yes.
That's a trained dog.
Now he has a lot to say on this topic, so he's like, "Let me tell you."
Sure.
Yeah, that it is such a growing interest, both in the military population and actually the older adult population. It's funny, there was, we have special issues or collections of articles, and there was a call for one all about older adults and pets, and the role that they play in promoting well-being and health. It's funny, I have my graduate student she was interested in kind of affectionate touch and like hugs, right? And hand holding and what that means for sleep quality and kind of how that type of touch can help you down regulate at night and get a better quality of sleep. And we actually ended up looking at different sources of affectionate touch. So like a spouse or partner, family and friends, and then pet was a specific, kind of source of that type of kind of loving or touch that demonstrates care. The findings didn't work out, right? We saw it was actually affectionate touch with your spouse that mattered for your sleep quality, not pet. That could be a byproduct of the way the questions were worded, and not everybody in the sample had a pet. But I think that's an important thing to keep in mind is that for older adults who live alone, right? Not everybody is partnered, or not everybody lives near family. A pet can be an important source of comfort and support, but it also can help you with older adults with things like maintaining a routine, right? You're getting up at a certain time because your pet needs to go out, which is probably what my dog needs to do right now. And maintaining routines around timing of sleep and wake time are actually really important mechanisms of maintaining sleep and getting good high quality sleep. So and also getting out and meeting people. There's people in the community I live, they're older adults. I end up talking to them because they're walking their dog and I'm walking mine, right? So I think a pet can be a gateway to a lot of other positive things for older adults, whether that's a network and support, even little interactions, just like saying hi to someone outside. That can go a long way. Those little micro interactions we're actually learning are really important for health and well-being. And then, like I said, those behaviors around getting out and going for a walk and maintaining a schedule. So it's really important. And there's actually a lot of, I would say, focus and interest on the role of pets, especially for older adults.
It's like a dog walking community. I walk a lot and I don't have a dog, but I see all the people who do have dogs talking to each other, waving to each other. And then in Tully over here, there's a dog park. And there's a lot of socializing goes on between the dogs, but the people also, sitting there making sure their dog doesn't kill the other dog. So, the dogs don't always get along.
I was on a flight. This is just a side note. Couple of weeks ago, coming home from Florida, and I've never seen so many dogs on a flight. And they have a little area for the dogs to play at the terminal at JetBlue. It was like every other person had a pet on the flight. And I have to say, the only noise I heard were from the crying babies. Now, can you do something about that? Because that was no barking, but the babies were just crying like crazy. So I know before we were just talking a little bit how people can get in touch with you. I do have a phone number. Do you prefer people to reach you on that 877 number, or would it be best for the email address?
Yeah, either one, whatever anybody is comfortable with. That 877 number is my office. Email's fine too. And just because your interest piqued and you want to hear more about it, that's not binding in any way. Like I'm happy to talk to anyone, and if you decide you're not interested, you won't hear from me again. So don't feel like reaching out means you're committed in any way. And if you're a veteran and you're interested, or maybe you just want to talk about your story for a couple minutes with someone, I'm happy to listen and to lend that ear. So feel free to reach out.
Do you have multiple studies going on at the same time?
Right now, this is the only study that I'm running, but our lab has, other things in the works. Dr. Catherine Fiore is looking to start a project with older adults more broadly. So we always have kind of multiple things, in the mix. And as new developments, come up, as we're recruiting for other studies, I'd be happy to keep lines of communication.
That's where I was going with this. Do you have like a list of the different studies, and who are you looking for each of those studies as a participant? It would be helpful if you had that. We could distribute that, frankly. Not me, I can't, but they could. I'm a volunteer.
You're more than a volunteer, Otto. Oh, you're an ambassador.
Yeah, well, I was going to put my application in with the town.
We'll double your salary, whatever you're getting now.
Yeah,
We're going to double it.
Yeah, big overhead I have here, So. No, it's been.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm saying things like, Project Independence, 16,000 members, whatever the number. And there are people within that who are active. They come to meetings, they come to events and parties and whatever. And among that group, there could be people who are interested in doing things like participating in studies,
Yeah.
Not everybody, but a lot, maybe.
It would actually be kind of fun in a way if there'd be kind of a study or a quick study that you could do in like one day, or several little mini studies, and we could like send a questionnaire out if there's just something, and then kind of come up with the results as they're there. I don't know if that's even possible, but actually we are at the end of this segment now. We want to thank you so much, Dr. Kristina Marini, for joining us, and for just being one of our newest friends with Project Independence. And I know our Kristina is working on whatever she can to keep you in our loop as a contact person, and for doing some programming, and we will be talking. So again, thank you so much for joining us today.